Okay, Grandmasters, Mike from the WCA. Let's take a look at the solutions video. With all the puzzles that you had to solve, every single one of them had a theme or an idea that's so useful in chess. So for example, in this one here, we're working on our calculation. So that's one of the big C's, right? Calculation. You have an opportunity as white to trade the queens by force. Black will not have a choice. So the move in the game that forces the queen trade is the move queen c7 check. And you can see by this diagonal here, the black king has to move off the diagonal, and then you have the opportunity to take the queen. The trick or the question was, should we do it? Well, the answer is yes, and you have to be able to prove why. After the check, the black king has a choice. He can move out of check and hang around this area, knowing that his pawns are over here, or he can make a run for it, try to win this pawn, which he can easily do, and then begin to march his pawn down the board and make a queen. Now, if you're playing white in this position and you trade the queens, you have to be able to calculate whether or not black is going to queen first. But it turns out, if you really spend the time and put the effort in, it's not that hard to see you definitely should trade the queens and win no matter what the black king does. Let's take a look. All right, let's look at the first example where the black king is going to go for your pawn on b5. That's this pawn right over here. And he's going to, oh my goodness, and he's going to take it, come after this pawn and run. But he's not going to have time. Why? Okay, we take the queen, he has to take back. And now we take the h pawn, which gives us these two split pawns. Now, there is a position in chess where you get to play with or against two split pawns. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. So that automatically wins, and I'll show you why. However, here, there's more than just those two split pawns, right? So let's say the black king decides to go for your b pawn. Well, let's do some simple math. What if we just make a run for it? Will he be able to catch us? The answer is no. He takes your pawn, and when you play h5, you then create a position where the pawn on h5 here is out of the king's reach. And you create something called the square of the pawn. Now you see how I made that square? I hope you can see those green arrows. See this square? It's a 4x4. To create a square of a pawn, just grab the pawn and go diagonal until you get to the edge of the board, either this way or that way. So obviously in this position we can't go off the board. So I'm going to go this way. When I get to the top of the board, I come up until I get to the same square the pawn was on. The same rank rather. See, the pawn is here, so I go diagonal, come up to the 5th rank, come back to where the pawn was, and then go up to the top of the board and simply complete the square. There's a very simple rule in chess. If the king cannot get inside that square, he can't catch the pawn. So the game is over. He can try to make a run for it, but he's way too slow. You just push, push, h7, a3, queen. And now a little tournament trick. If the king comes down the board trying to support his pawn, just plop your queen right in front of that pawn, and the game is going to end very quickly. He can come down, but you'll see the king can never approach the queen. Now, if this were a rook, you might have some issue. The king could attack the rook and maybe queen, but in this position, that's not going to happen. Plus, you just play king g2, and you're going to win the black pawn, make another queen. Game is finished, I tell you. Okay, let's go back for a minute. Okay, here's the original. We give the check. I showed you what happens if the king goes to the left. Well, what if he comes this way and decides to hang around his queen? Just take the queen, pawn comes off, and then you take the h pawn, giving you these two split pawns. Now, black is in big trouble because he can try to attack your pawn, for example, but we can easily defend that. And that gives us the position with the two split pawns, which is automatically winning. even with all the other stuff on the board. And I'm going to show you in a minute what happens if you have split pawns in an open position. Hang on, I have to get my drawing board out. Okay. Boy, that takes a lot of effort. See those two split pawns? This is a separate exercise, and I'll take you back to the original position in a moment. Watch what happens here. Let's say it's black's move, and he attacks one of your split pawns. And why am I saying split? They're separated by one file. In order to save the win, which you definitely have here, you should win this, all you need to do is push one of them. And the problem for the king is, if he ever takes the back pawn, you see how I highlighted the line the king is on? It's underneath this guy. Well, what happens if this pawn pushes? Remember that square of the pawn trick I showed you? Let's make a square. Here, 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 and here. You see the square? Can the black king touch that square? The answer is no way. If he tries to touch the pawn, we just push. We're going to queen on the next move, and I think everyone knows how to do a queen and king checkmate. Okay, so go back. Here's your position. He attacks your pawn, just push the other one. If he backs up, it's very important here that you don't realign or set up your pawns again, because now he can take this pawn. You see, he's not underneath this guy, and if you try to make a run for it, he can catch you. He's inside the square of the pawn. So what you do if he backs up is simply get your king involved, and then you'll win the game very easily. Lots of ways to do this. King backs up, and now since he's not attacking one of the pawns, you can simply play pawn e5, lining them up again. Now, he backs up. You realign your pawns, and he comes back to start trouble. What should you do? Pause the video if you're not sure. Push. He can't take the back pawn. He backs up, in comes our king. And if you practice this once or twice on a real board, you'll see that this is actually really, really easy to do. King comes in, king f8. Me personally, I start getting a little nervous when the king's getting boxed in up there about stalemate. I have to be careful that I don't use my two pawns and king and create a stalemate position. King f6, let's say king g8, e7, and king h7. Okay, question. Should you make a queen here? What happens if you queen? Whoops. What is that? Stalemate. You have to be real careful in chess. So what can you do? Actually, this is a pretty cool position. You can force a checkmate, but how? What would you guys do here after king f7? I think that works, right? Let's take it back again. He goes to h7, just put your king on f7. And now he walks right into checkmate. King goes to h8, checkmate in 2 moves. Can you see it? Okay. Check. King up, mate in 1. Beautiful. Here's a fancy one. Watch this. King h8, mate in 2. Ready? How about king g6? That's cool. King has to go to g8, and I don't feel like lifting a whole queen. She's too heavy, so I'll make it a rook. How does that look? Okay, perfect. Let's go back to number 1 real quick. So in our position here in number 1, we had the 2 split pawns, but as you can see, there's other things on the board. King will back up, just take the pawn, and I'm not going to show the rest here because you guys should really be able to win this with 3 pawns against 1, right? What do you think? So there was the solution to number 1. You give that check, and it was the right idea to trade queens. Number 1 is done. Okay, here was number 2. Number 2 said in the notes, you can force a checkmate here, and it's actually in 2 moves. And by giving you those hints, it kind of messes with you a little bit because there's only 1 check in the position. So if you think it's mate in 2, it's very natural to start with a check. But you would have found that had you played rook to d6 check, after the king gets out of check, you're still winning this position, but you didn't mate the king in 2 moves. So why am I making you do it in 2? To teach you a concept. And it's the concept of Zugzwang. What a great word. It's a German word that basically means you have to move, and whatever you do, something bad is really going to happen on the next move. Like your position just worsens. So the correct way to solve mate in 2, you had to find the move rook d7. Ouchie. Great move. How many legal moves does black have in this position? And once you realize how powerful rook d7 is, then you realize that all the legal moves don't help. The only thing that black can do in this position is move this rook. So he can come to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares. The problem is it doesn't matter which one you choose. Even if you want to give your rook away for free, I won't take it. Rook takes h7, checkmate. That was a really cool puzzle. Okay, crazy cats. Here's number 3. Number 3 is you getting checkmated as white, but I want you to see it from your side, right? So it's black to play and checkmate the white king, but I want you to be able to see it as if you were playing somebody else. So did you guys find it? It was a mate in 3 here, and all you have to do is give a check with this queen, but it's important where you give the check from. If you give the check from b1, which was one of the checks, you should always look at them, and the king comes to h2, you don't really have a forced checkmate here. As a matter of fact, this game is so equal it would probably end in a draw. However, if you go back, let's back up a couple of moves here. Where are the other checks in this position? Well, you could sacrifice your queen on g2. I don't think that's going to work. But did you see queen g3? And the importance of queen g3 is that from here she lines up on this diagonal. After king h2, which is the only move, you now have g3 check. And the only way to get out of check, white has to take, and you simply take back with your pawn, and that pattern is checkmate. Okay, so that's why in this position queen e1 worked. Let's go back and make sure you see it from this position. Great. Okay, here comes number 4. I said in the blog, same idea. You're white, but it's black's move, and that I wanted you to see the danger coming from the other side. It's so important to be able to calculate things from the other side of the board. As a matter of fact, when you start getting to know masters and experts and grandmasters, the top players are really, really concerned with what their opponents are thinking, sometimes more so than themselves. They're always trying to figure out what's coming from the other side. Here, it's a pure checkmate. It's mate in 3, but you have to be a little creative to see it. And one way to do it, I think there's more than one, but this is the one, the main way to do it, is you take your bishop and you put it on b1, which is a fancy move. It stalemates the king. Notice I said the king, not the game. The only thing white can move is the b pawn. It can come to b3 or b4, and it really doesn't matter. If you play b4 in this position, you simply take this pawn en passant as black. Now don't forget, you're seeing this from the white side, but black would be able to take en passant, right? Once that happens, what's the only legal move left for white? They have to push the a pawn to a4, and then there's your checkmate. Okay, so let's look at it again after b1, bishop to b1. What's the only thing white can do? Move the b pawn. Well, what if they only move it 1 square? Does it change things? Think about it. No, it does not. You just take it. Whether you take it en passant or the regular way, the pawn has to run. Thank you very much for a nice game. That's cute, right? There's the position. Let's back it up a move and make sure you can calculate this from here. Okay? Very nice. Okay, here's number 5. White forces checkmate. How? Well, remember Rusa always telling you, look for every check and capture. And those of you who didn't get a chance to work with her, she's very nice. Anyway, now she's supposed to say I'm very funny. You'd have to be kind of like an insider to know that joke. There's a forced checkmate here. Look at every check and capture. Here, we're learning the technique of deflection. where, like in soccer, if you hit the ball and it hits the post, this happens in hockey as well, and it deflects. It hits the post and kicks off to one side. What we'd want to do here, if we could get this king into the corner, do you see that here in this position, the queen and the rook are both pointing in this direction, and if you could take that rook, you would checkmate the king. So the question is, does it matter with which piece we take with first? So for example here, the solution that works is queen takes on f8, check. Now, how does black get out? Look carefully. Well, the king can't take the queen, correct? Because there's a rook down here on f3. So the only move to get out of check is you take. Now, why can't you just take the rook for free and checkmate the king? The reason, well, he's not on h8. If he were on h8, you have mate in 1. Well, how do you deflect the king? Check. Oops. King has to go in the corner, and there's mate. Let's go back for a second. Does it work in reverse? Why don't we just take the rook here with our rook? It should be the same. You take, the knight checks, the king goes in the corner. Whoops, there's a couple of problems with that, isn't there? Number one, if you take with the rook first and they take back, you can't sacrifice your queen. And if you check, the king here with the knight, I don't know how much of this you can see, he can just come out. There's a huge difference if you take with the rook first. You take there, I have to take back. What do? Knight e7 check does not work. My king just comes out. And, white might be in a little bit of trouble here. Okay, did you solve it? One more time, take a look from here. Make sure you see it. White to play and force checkmate. Queen takes rook. Rook has to recapture. Deflect the king. Into the corner he goes. Thank you very much for a nice game. Okay, my friends. Here comes number 6. I think this one was the hardest for a lot of us to see all the way through. This is a position where black is up a pawn, and if it were black's move, white would be in big trouble. And probably the simplest way for black to win this game would just be to throw the pawn that's furthest away from this king up the board. And white has a problem. You pretty much have to take it. If you don't take it, he's going to run past you. So if you take and take, you'll see that whatever you try to do, let's say you push a pawn on this side, you're not going to be able to stop black from queening a pawn because the pawn here is clearly, oh, look at that, I made a square, clearly outside the square of that pawn. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. After h5, if we take and take, can't we play like king d3 and get inside the square of this pawn? It's true we can. After h4, for example, this king is inside that box, correct? But what happens if we just simply, after king d3, play king b5? Now, what's the idea of this? Well, what I want to do after that move is, if the white king comes anywhere near our two pawns on this side, we can just line them up. Does that look familiar to you? That's the split pawn idea that I showed in the other solution. So from here, if, say, the king attacks one of our split pawns, what do? Do you remember? Push the other one. If he backs up, now all we have to do is take the two white pawns on this side of the board and the game is over. If given the opportunity, you can just line your pawns up again. If he attacks one, push the other. How cool is this? It's the same idea. King backs up, take a pawn, and you're either going to take this pawn and queen this guy, or, I don't know, say the king goes to g1, we get an opportunity to push again, and if he plays a move like king h1, then we just play f2. And there's no way for white to stop us from making a queen. So clearly, if it's black's turn, white is in big, big trouble. However, in this position, it said it was white's move because it said white has 7 legal moves. 6 of them lose and 1 wins. Did you find the winning move? Not so easy. you have to find the move pawn g5, which is kind of cool. Because of the en passant rule, this one little pawn on g5 stops this pawn from moving, stops this pawn from moving. I mean, they can move, but you're going to capture them and make a queen. So clearly, like if h5 is played, like in the original, you simply take it en passant and you're going to have a queen in 2 moves, right? So what does black do here? If he tries to run with this pawn, you simply take it, and now the problem for black, even though they have 2 connected passed pawns, I mean, these guys look dangerous, this pawn has to be dealt with because it's only 2 squares away from queening. So as the black king approaches that pawn, say with king d7, you simply make a passed pawn on this side of the board. You play a move like a4. Why? Well, he comes after your pawn, b5. And now, no matter what happens, say takes, check, take back, if they take you, you'll see that after b6, there you go. Wow, look at that square. The king cannot get inside it. He can make a run for it with a pawn, but we just play b7. After h4, queen, king comes to g5, but with your queen and king, just simply march them toward this part of the board and you'll have no trouble winning that position. Okay, so back here, black's first move, h5 wins. White's first move, g5 wins. Very, very cool position. Okay, friends, number 7. I'm going to go fast. This is just a straight checkmate. The idea, again, well, what'd you find? You tell me. Come to class and tell me, hey, I found this on my own. Terrific. The answer was queen takes f7 check. Very cool move. If the king simply moves away and doesn't accept the sacrifice, you can take the bishop checkmate. Actually, in that position, you can even take with the bishop. Sorry. That's mate as well. So when you sacrifice your queen here, the only way to get out of check is rook takes queen. The problem for the rook, however, is that it remains in a pin. The checkmate from here, being that it's pinned, is you simply check with your rook. Now, it does black no good to block with the queen. I mean, they could. You just take it, and then the only way to get out of check would be to block with the bishop, and then you simply take it for a checkmate. And that's really, really cool. There's your queen sacrifice. Let's back it up from here. Can you see it now? Calculate it one more time. Very good. Okay, guys, this was the last puzzle, and basically said, you know, it looks like you're in big trouble. You're playing black. Your king is boxed down here. Now, I flipped the board for this puzzle, so you are sitting at the black side. Hopefully, you guys can see the letters and numbers. I know there's been some complaints that the diagrams, you can't see them clearly, but you are sitting on the black side here. So these 2 pawns are very close to queening. You know, the rook check, there's all sorts of stuff that can go on. So if you randomly move your rook away, I don't know, let's say you move your rook to c3, you're going to get hit with this check, and you have to come out here, which would allow me to, you know, queen a pawn with check, for example, and that's really bad. I mean, I don't know, where do I begin? This is so bad for black. So you definitely don't want to put your rook here on c3. So do you resign? No. You have a really, really cool idea here. And this is sort of similar to the mate in 2 that I did on puzzle number 2. Where does this black king move if it were his turn? Well, it is his turn, but he has a rook. But if there was no rook, this position would be a stalemate. How cool is that? So what if you just gave a check with the rook? The king can't take. I mean, he can move around a little bit, and you can probably continue to check him until, you know, they admit it's a draw, but you have an actual faster way to use that idea. Let's go back. The second check is even smoother because here, if the king takes, again, we have stalemate, and that's what we want. We want to draw in this position. You're not going to try to win. But if he doesn't take and he comes here, you can continue checking, But you can also simply take the pawn on g6, which will force a draw. If the rook checks you down here on the bottom, you just take the white pawn with your king. And if the king moves somewhere, let's say they play a move like this, then you can simply challenge the rook on g7. And if everything comes off, you're definitely inside the square of that pawn, and you make a draw. So take a look at it from here one more time, and make sure you see this really, really cool idea of just checking on g3, forcing a draw. Okay? I hope you learned something.